So the reproductive system, and this is the last system we're going to do. So we'll do the male, right with this thing, the male and the female reproductive system. So this is all about getting your chromosomes from one generation down to the next and to the next to the next to propagate our species. And remember, this all starts on only Friday nights, right? Sin, right? Friday night only. So we're not going to go too deep into the types of cells and how they develop through meiosis, but you'll learn that in lecture. But if you think of the most immature female gamete, now a gamete is either a sperm or egg. So those are the sex cells. So when you see oogonia, gonia as a suffix is a very immature primordial cell. So you're making oogonias in your ovaries before you're even born. And you're making many, many, many of them. They're not viable eggs that can be fertilized, but they hopefully someday will become a viable fertilizable egg. So certain steps, mitosis and meiosis, will lead to a secondary oocyte or mature oocyte ready to be fertilized. And again, I'm not going to go through this too deeply, but in lecture, you'll see that an oogonia will undergo mitosis, which winds up giving you two identical cells. And you'll see that this is going to be diploid, which is 2N. And then you have mitosis, and you have another 2N cell that's going to divide through meiosis. And that will give you 4 cells that are haploid, which is 1N. So let me just define diploid, 2N is diploid. And that is 46 chromosomes. And haploid is 1N, just so you know this, is 23 chromosomes. So technically, and again, I'm not going to go into this too deep, but 46 chromosomes is 23 pairs. So diploid cells, like all our somatic cells is anything that's not a gamete, anything that's not a sperm, anything that's not an egg. Sperm in male, egg in female. So egg is also called oogonia. So now if you take the sperm and the egg, right, sperm, which is 1N, and oocyte, which is egg, it's also 1N. You put those together on a Friday night, and what do you have? You have 1,2N zygote. And that becomes the little Mateos, right? The new person. So secondary oocyte is the most important viable fertilizable egg. I'm not going to go into definitive oocyte. So this is the ovary. Again, we're moving a little bit into female. I'm going to go into male and all the parts and everything, but I just want to see where that is, by the way. They do female first, which is probably best, but in our labs, we do male first. So let's just go through the female ovary real quick. Back. So this is one of the ovaries. And let's do the cells first. This is probably the hardest part. So the ovary is not really directly connected to the uterus by a tube. It's just connected via a ligament to the uterus. So the ovaries, and there's 2 ovaries, is one organ. So you have different stages of oocytes. Like right here, these are primordial follicles. And I'll show you this in APR later. And these, of course, are very immature. Primordial is very immature. And they will develop, again, undergo meiosis and develop into primary follicles. So these are primary follicles, and they continue to mature. So within the follicles, you have the oogonia. And then, I'm sorry, in the primordial follicles, you have oogonia. In the primary follicles, you have primary oocytes. And then in the secondary follicle, it's a little more complicated. You could have a primary oocyte or a secondary oocyte because it's still maturing in the secondary follicle. Now, this follicle is the maturest of all the follicles, and they call that vesicular follicle or Graafian. It's a weird spelling, Graafian follicle. And now this mature follicle always contains a secondary oocyte. And you're going to learn that, the whole ovarian cycle where the very high surge of the hormone. Now you do an endocrine now, so you're going to hear of a hormone called LH, luteinizing hormone, and that's like at the 14th day of your ovarian cycle. And there's always a ton of estrogen at this point too. So you know these hormones. And then once that LH surges, this secondary oocyte is going to be ovulated. And that's right about the 14th day, really. And this secondary oocyte is just brought into the peritoneal cavity, basically, and it's going to be caught by the fallopian tube and part of the fallopian tube, which I'll show you the parts later. So there are some pictures of these particular follicles we'll see, and you'll have to name them on the exam. Very simple. And you just have to say follicle is the whole spaceship. The oocyte is just the cell inside. So once the follicle is ovulated, right here, day 14, now we'll talk about where the follicle, I'm sorry, I said follicle, it's really the oocyte that's ovulated. Once the oocyte is ovulated, the follicle will now become this really cool structure called the corpus luteum. Now, if there's no sperm present on this Friday night, right? No sperm, then you're not going to have a pregnancy or not going to have fertilization. So if there is no sperm present, then the corpus luteum will degenerate and become a structure called corpus albicans. It's like a white body. And that is going to drop your hormone levels severely. Like in reproduction, you'll learn that the corpus luteum continues to secrete estrogen and another important hormone called progesterone. Progesterone is released from the corpus luteum and it gets the uterus ready just in case there's a fertilization and then you have implantation. So if there's no fertilization, then the corpus luteum is going to degenerate. So later on, we'll go to APR and we'll look at these different structures. And this is one of those glands that has like the middle is called the medulla and all the outer stuff is cortex. So that's basically the female gonad is the ovary. The gonad is the ovary. The gamete is the oocyte, and the oocyte is haploid, 23 chromosomes, not 46 pairs. I'm sorry, not 23 pairs, just 23 chromosomes. So you can take a look at some of these, and this is more histology, which you'll see in the APR. Like I'll show you a picture of this on the exam. And all you have to say is follicle. If we're pointing to that, if I'm pointing to this, or highlighting this, that's your oocyte. Same thing here. This is just a mature one, right? And you don't really have to say primary and secondary from my exam, but for lecture, you kind of have to know the difference in their stages of the ovarian cycle. And these are primordial follicles with oogonia, or primary oocyte, very immature. And same thing, just as this close-up of the histology. And we really don't do this. So you're not going to have to see each particular one close up until I show you in the APR, which is very straightforward. So again, this is all like more from lecture. Same thing, now we're going into the uterine tube. I'll show you the gross anatomy. So let's go to the gross anatomy. We can start with the male right here. I don't know if you can see this close up, but we'll go through. Actually, we might just go to the APR, might be easier. But let's start with the male reproductive structures. And the top is just like, this is like the model we'd have in lab. Like this is just as an external piece there. And really, this is kind of tight for me to see. So I think we're gonna go over to APR sooner than later. So a couple of things you should notice here. In the male reproductive system, in the male model, you see that the genitals are on the outside. And the gonad for the male is called testes. So the testes is outside. So let me just pause this. I'm going to go into the APR. So this is the mid-sagittal view of the male cadaver. So again, you got to know what you're looking at, first of all. So let's just go down this list. Actually, let's start with, I think I'm going to start my way. We're going to start with the gonad, which is the testes. Now that is highlighted there in red. The testes is where the testosterone is made and where the sperm is made. And in lecture, you'll get a close-up and understand that the sperm is made in a place called the seminiferous tubules. And they utilize a cell called Sertoli cell. Testosterone is made between the Sertoli cells and the interstitial areas. So that is the testes. And of course, you can't see it because this is other part that's on top of the testes, which is highlighted now in this picture. And that's called the epididymis. Now, remember the testes on the outside. There's two testes, right, in one scrotal sac, which I'll show you that. So the epididymis that's highlighted right now is a storage area where the sperm continue to be matured. So here's where they learn how to swim, and they develop that tail. And there's probably a full-size Olympic swimming pool in the epididymis for the sperm to get ready to swim. So let me just show you the scrotum, which is the covering right there, which is epithelial tissue, dermis and hypodermis. Okay, and you have to look at both views. You could go back and look at the anterior view and lateral view, not the posterior. You don't need posterior view. So now the penis has different sections to it. Like this is erectile tissue on the lateral, and there's two parts to this, and this is called the corpus cavernosum. So you have to tell the difference between the corpus cavernosum, which you're looking at now, and the corpus spongiosum. And you'll see that the corpus spongiosum is surrounding a tube called the spongy urethra. And in the male, the urethra is shared urinary and reproductive system. So there's urine excretion and there's reproductive sperm expulsion, ejaculation from the urethra. But this is just one part of the urethra that goes through the penis. That's called spongy urethra, which you'll see in a minute. Glans penis is just the basic top of the penis or the head of the penis. I think that's on your list. I mean, I could just ask for this because, again, you've never seen these cadaver slides, so you have to understand that this is the genitalia outside, and this is just the penis. It would be the answer to this one. And let's get a couple other things. Here's the membranous urethra. So this is hard to see. It's right here, just that small part, membranous urethra. And then you have the prostate gland, which is right here. That's part of there's three glands you have to know for the male reproductive system. There's the prostate gland, the seminal vesicles, and the bulbourethral gland. We'll see that on different pictures. So what's highlighted now is the prostate gland. There's only one prostate gland. There's two seminal vesicles, and there's two bulbourethral gland. The bulbourethral gland is also known as the Cowper's gland. So let's see, pelvic part of the vas deferens. I'm not going to use that picture because it's too small. It doesn't really show it. So as far as this view goes, that's pretty much it for this view. But again, you have to go and look at different views. So let's see. If Catch another view in the perineum of the penis, just a close up of the penis and scrotum. Again, hopefully this will move fairly fast. And corpus cavernosum. Now this is it if you dissected the root, the shaft of the penis off, and you're looking just at the two parts of the corpus cavernosum. Corpus spongiosum will be right around the urethra. And you definitely will see this picture on the exam. This is the epididymis, testes, scrotal sac, scrotum, more out, that's more external, superficial. And testes. Oh, here, this is an important one. I think you'll definitely see this on the exam. Now, this is the vas deferens, also known as the ductus deferens. So here is where the sperm that's coming from the epididymis will be carried all the way up and around the urinary bladder, and it will enter the urethra via the ejaculatory duct. So that could be on your list, the ejaculatory duct. It's not in this particular picture, I don't think. No. You don't have to know the different parts of the epididymis, you just have to know that that's the epididymis. And that's an anterior view. And let's see another view. If we get the testes and the spermatic cord, I don't know if this is valuable for us. Let's see. This is possible, but I doubt it. You'll see just a picture. It's too hard to understand what you're looking at. But this is a nice close-up, actually. It shows like a close-up of the testes and the vas deferens, and then the epididymis. So again, go through your list, go through this group, go to the atlas on MH Connect, and you can see that. So let's go through the female pelvis. This is going to be a new thing. So let's see if we can point out some structures here. Okay, sagittal, mid-sagittal first. Okay, so this is a pretty common picture you'll see, and there's also the external parts. Now this is where you have to be careful. Now, the first thing I guess I want to show you is the uterus, right? Because the uterus is a continuation of the vagina. But if you look below the uterus in this area right here, that's the urinary bladder. So the female urethra is anterior to the right in your picture. So there's two openings. Like in the male, it was just one urethra for reproductive and urinary. For the female, you just have two. You have the cervical, cervix is the opening of the uterus, which I'll show you, then the vagina. So the opening is the vagina towards the uterus, and towards the bladder, it's the urethra, which is a lot shorter in the female. So this is a little more difficult. So that's the uterus. The vagina is outlined here. And then back to the uterus. Now the opening of the uterus is called the cervix. So you will see this on the test too. This is the opening of the uterus called the cervix. And then you have the tubes. Well, let me show you the ovary first. This is kind of tough to see. You see it way back there. And there are better pictures, like, we'll look at a different view and you can see. So this is probably not the one I would show you on a test, just for ovary. Let's see what the uterine tube is also known as the fallopian tube is attached. Not attached to the ovary. Like, let's look, this is the uterine tube. This is the ovary. So they're not attached. And the ovary is only attached to the uterus via the ovarian ligament. And of course, the outside stuff you probably learned in health class in grammar school or middle school, where you have the labia majora or labia majus and labia minor of the vagina. The mons pubis is right in front, anterior, like this is the pubic bone. This is just above the vagina, where you have pubic hair on the mons pubis. And you have the clitoris, which is anterior to the vagina. So all these parts are on your list. Different parts of the uterus, like this is very, very common in any organ, like even the stomach has the fundus on top like that. Then the body further down, like here, most of it. But the one that's most important for us is the cervix of the uterus. But this is all uterus, right? This is all uterus. And uterus, you'll learn in lecture, has 3 different layers. The innermost layer is endometrium. The middle layer is called myometrium, which is muscle. And the outer portion of the uterus is called perimetrium. So if that's on your list, there'll be pictures of it, but I don't think it is. So again, don't forget the external stuff like the mons pubis, the labia minor, labia major, and different views of that. And the clitoris right there. And back here is the rectum. So if you look left to right, you'll see like there's a coccyx bone in the sacrum is most posterior left. And then you have, right, which is right here. Then you have the rectum, the vagina, and then the bladder in that order. So the bladder is below the uterus. So you know the story, like on a Friday night when the sperm swims up the vagina into the uterus through the cervix, and will go into the fallopian tube, which I don't know if we can see so good here, right? It'll go into the uterine tube is the same thing. And then the uterine tube is where fertilization takes place. So the egg will be ovulated from the ovary into the cavity, and then it's picked up by a structure called fimbriae. You don't see it on this picture. I'll show it to you in another slide, but the fimbriae is attached to the fallopian tube or uterine tube, and that picks up the ovulated oocyte and brings it down into the tube where it's fertilized. Implantation, or where pregnancy takes place, is in the endometrium of the uterus, the most inner lining. So we'll take another look at a different place. So let's see if we can see the perineum, which is basically what you'll see right now, is between the anal canal and the vagina. And this is the female. So again, you can see, I'm not going to use that picture, but, oh, there it is. I'm sorry, there's the clitoris outline there. So it's taking very slow to load these pictures. So I know what you go through when you're taking a test. When your internet is not great. So this is labia majus or major, labium minus. Mons pubis is that area up top, outline there. The orifice of the vagina. And vestibule perineum. So there'll be pictures of more of the, again, this is just the female perineal view. Let's see what else we have. We're not going to do the breasts this exam. So again, the pelvis will, we looked at this in the female, but let's look at a different view. Superior view, see what this one looks like. Okay, so now we're looking into the cavity, and you can see the uterine tube on both sides. There's 2 of them because there's 2 ovaries. So here's the ovary. Now, on the top of the fallopian tube or uterine tube are these like catcher's gloves looking things. And these are called fimbriae. So when the ovary releases and ovulates the secondary oocyte, it'll be picked up by the fimbriae, or the catcher's mitt of the fallopian tube. Sin, don't put catcher's mitt, put fimbriae, please. That's really not the way to say it. So the fimbriae will pick up the oocyte, and then it'll take it into the uterine tube. Now, the uterine tube is connected by a duct to the uterus. So again, on a Friday night, if the sperm is present, it'll come into the uterine tube and meet the oocyte. And then once the oocyte is fertilized, it'll go into the uterus. And then the ovarian cycle changes. Now, because different hormones will be released, like HCG, which is what gives you a positive pregnancy test when you pee on it at this stage. So if this is Friday night, probably by Thursday, you can probably find out the following Thursday or Friday. Okay, so, oh, here's the uterus in this picture. So get a good look at this. And if you look below, I don't think it's going to highlight it for us, but right below the uterus is the bladder, urinary bladder. So you don't do urinary system until A&P2. So again, this is a pretty important picture here. This is a lot of stuff. It's tough to see. Like if we were in lab, we might dissect a fetal pig, and you can even see it in the fetal pig that's not even born yet. So once again, you have the ovary. You have the fimbriae, which belongs to the uterine tube. Uterine tube is also known as the fallopian tube or oviduct, same thing. And here's the oviduct or uterine tube or fallopian tube, which is connected to the uterus. Okay. Let's just pause that for a second. So now we're in the atlas, reproductive atlas. And you can see and I always like this because they showed the cadaver to the right and the model to the left. So it's two different things. So you really have to go through these as well. Now here's I call this the seminal vesicles, but these are the seminal glands. And there's 3 different glands that add semen to the sperm. And the first one, and the most abundant producing glands, there's 2 of them, are seminal glands, also known as the seminal vesicles. So there you have it on the right and left. Then you have the prostate gland. There's only 1 of those. So this is definitely on the test, the prostate gland, from a couple of different views. So make sure you're real comfortable with the prostate gland. And I will give you a recording next week. I will do it. We'll do it live and I'll record it. All the slides that I could use, just like on the last couple of exams. And again, genitalia is outside penis, which includes the corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosum. Both of those, spongiosum and cavernosum, are erectile tissue, very vascular, elastic tissue. And then you have the covering, the scrotum we saw, the gonad, which is the testes, which has the epididymis, just right on top, and then the vas or ductus deferens. So this is a pretty good slide right here, pretty good picture of everything. And that goes on. Basically the same thing. You can see corpus cavernosum. There's actually 2 of those. Corpus spongiosum, there's just 1 that surrounds the spongy urethra. And then the glands is the head. I think those are on your list. It's the model on the left that's usually in the lab. Just to give you an idea, like where this is, the pubic symphysis is there. Now here's the 3 urethras. So the uppermost one is the prostatic urethra. And you can see it's going through that walnut-shaped gland that produces semen called the prostate. The membranous urethra is a small piece between the prostatic urethra and then the one that goes through the penis is called spongy urethra. Penile is perfectly acceptable, but that's urethra, right? Urethra. And remember, in the male, the urethra is shared reproductive and urinary systems. Here's a female model. I don't ask you too much about ligaments, but this kind of holds everything in place, like the broad ligament. This is not the fallopian tube. It's a ligament. I won't ask you that particular one. That's the round ligament. This is one that's kind of important because the ovarian ligament attaches the ovary to the uterus, and it's not a tube. It's just a ligament which just connects the 2 parts. And then there's just a suspensory ligament that kind of holds it to the peritoneum. So these models are basically what we would be doing in lab, which is very straightforward. It's almost harder to take this part online as we go into the cadavers. So this is the uterus now, and the fundus and body of the uterus. And then the bottom, the opening to the vagina, is the cervix, and that is definitely on the exam, the cervix. So know the uterus, and then you have the vaginal orifice. And look, the front is urethra, two different orifices, right? And the one behind it, posterior to your right this time, is the rectum. So you have the rectum to the right, the vagina, urethra. So urethra, of course, is emptying the bladder. The vagina is the birth canal from the uterus. So that when the baby's fetus is born, it comes down from the uterus to the vagina, to the vaginal orifice. Okay, and the cavity. Now we could see the uterus. I probably won't use the picture to the left. So let's look at the cadaver to the right. So the uterus and ovaries, and there's the uterine tubes. And you know about the fimbriae. And the round ligaments are just ligaments just holding the uterus in place, really, in the peritoneum. Peritoneum is the part of the pelvis that's in the abdominal cavity that contains reproductive and digestive tubes, structures. You'll learn the digestive system next semester if you're taking AP2. This is not really a picture we're going to use, so I'm not going to take you there. Let's see if the lateral pelvis. Yeah, this is a good one. So again, you have, you could go through, use the quizzes and the practice in this particular application in McGraw-Hill. Really good. So again, I think we might not have hit everything on the list so far. So go through your list, and by the time you come next week, you don't have any homework, you don't have any virtual labs to do.